From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to Blue Sky, where we share stories and insights to remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. I'm your host, Bill Burke. One of the most rewarding parts of the work I've done since founding the Optimism Institute a few years back has been discovering just how many people and organizations around the world are also doing what they can to spread hope and positivity through research, writing, convening, and yes, podcasting. My guest today is one of these people. Beatrice Erkers is the director of the Existential Hope Program at the Foresight Institute, where she leads work on imagining the kinds of futures we want to build with the technologies we develop. She co-hosts the Existential Hope Podcast, featuring conversations with great thinkers, including illustrious Blue Sky alums Steven Pinker and Kevin Kelly. Her work has been featured in BBC Future, Big Think, the SF Standard, The Beautiful Truth, and the Future of Life Institute podcast. A native of Sweden, Beatrice holds a BA in comparative literature and an MS in the history of science and ideas from Uppsala University. I hope you enjoy this Blue Sky conversation with Beatrice Erkers as much as I did. Beatrice Erkers, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast.
Thank you so much, Bill. Really nice to be here.
It's terrific to have you on. And I was doing my research, I was interested in your background and your education background, and particularly how you got from what you studied to what you're doing now. So one of your degrees is in comparative literature, and I'm a liberal arts person. I was a history major, so I love that. And I also love this MS in history of science and ideas. So I'd love to know how you go from comparative literature to science and ideas, and then the work that you're doing today.
Yeah. Well, that's a fair question, I would say. I didn't know the trajectory. So basically, when I started studying, especially when I started doing my master's, like for my bachelor, I was just doing whatever I thought was the most interesting, which was to read books. And I really enjoyed that. And for my master's, I thought that, the only career possible with this is to do a PhD. And so that's what I thought that I was going to do. But then as I did my master's thesis, I did not enjoy it, to be honest. I was like, this is very slow. This is I found it very frustrating, and just like, I didn't understand. It felt really pointless, basically. I felt like we were just like rehashing all. I kind of wanted to. I think I should have studied philosophy, to be honest. If I had known now, I should have studied philosophy, because there you're actually trying to think about what's right and wrong. Whereas in like history, you try to think about what happened here, rather than like trying to think what's the best way to do it. But so the way that like the path was. I did an internship at a publishing house while I was doing my master's degree. And I think that was just a great way to like get out there into the real world, basically. And as I did that, I got a job at that publishing house after. And so that was my like foot into the real world. And then I was just really interested in finding a way where I could have like a more impactful career. I was thinking a lot about where I could like work with something that would have an impact. And I was using, have you heard of 80,000 Hours, this website?
I have not.
So I think they're really inspiring. They basically talk about like we have 80,000 hours in our career. And so we should really think about what we spend those hours in doing. And so they collect basically cause areas that they think are really important to work on. And they also, for example, have a job board. So they're like, these are roles that are available right now in fields that we think could be really impactful. And there I found the role for the Foresight Institute, where I now work, which is a nonprofit. Maybe you've already introduced it to the listeners, but it's a nonprofit working on science and technology. And yeah, I managed somehow to get in there, basically.
That's amazing. And when you saw Foresight Institute and you read more about them, do you consider yourself sort of a naturally optimistic, hopeful, positive person? Did that draw you right away, or has the work moved you there, or a little bit of both?
Probably a little bit of both. Probably I am biased optimistic, just because, and it's honestly just because the opposite frustrates me. Like, I don't understand the point of being like overly pessimistic, because it's like, well, either way you got to try. Like, it's like, what are you going to do? Just like say it's impossible and not try? That just seems so pointless to me. That, yeah, I guess it comes from a frustration almost. And also because we get it wrong. Like, a really big influence on me was this professor, Hans Rosling. I'm from Sweden, and he was like this really, I'm
a huge fan.
Yeah.
Huge fan.
And he, always talked about like how we're worse than chimpanzees in terms of like actually separating fact from fiction, and that, we so often just like are so biased towards the negative. And so that was just something that I think, if you actually look at the data over time, we're doing a lot better in many trajectories. I'm not saying everything is always getting better, but it's more like if we continue to work on it and so on, we definitely have the chance to make it better. So yeah, biased in terms of optimism, and the work at Foresight Institute has definitely, I think, made me, it has probably stretched me on the spectrum of like optimistic versus pessimistic. I feel like most of the population has gone more towards the pessimistic side, and I've gone more towards the optimistic side. So it's probably, I need to pull them with me there.
So I'm curious about that last part about the spectrum too, because I don't know how old you are, but you're definitely younger than I am. And I have kids, young adults who are 31 and 29. And that's an age group where a lot of us who are my age worry that the pessimism has gotten to the point where it could actually be a barrier to the historical progress we've had, right? To your point before, why bother if you think the world's going to end in 30 years? Like, young people say, well, I'm not going to have kids because the world's going to end in 30 years. Well, it's a perfectly fine decision not to have kids. But if you've decided that the world's going to end in 30 years, why bother to be environmentally conscious? Why bother to vote for people who feel that way? Do you find in your age cohort that you're more of an outlier? Do people roll their eyes sometimes when you tell them what you do, and they think you're unrealistic and naive and that sort of thing?
I think I've managed to place myself in a social group where the norm is, I would say that it's a bunch of people that are very lucky to be able to work on things that they feel can actually make a change. And I think this is probably the difference, where I think a lot of people are potentially like stuck in situations where they aren't, maybe feel like they are able to contribute, and they're maybe stuck in things that feel a bit pointless and meaningless. So I would really point them towards like this 80,000 hours thing that I mentioned, or like finding, because I think there's like so much talk about how we can create more meaning in our lives. And I think that it's kind of the wrong question to ask to some extent, or like the way to create meaning in your life is to do something meaningful, rather than like thinking about it artificially, like, well, how can I feel more meaning? The question should be like, how can I do something meaningful? And so that's why I think that I hope that my generation could come into that a bit more. I think this is I am also 30 plus, so I think for the generation below me, like I have younger siblings that are more like 20 years old, and that seems like, I think I understand that they are stressed basically, because
sure.
It seems stressful to have grown up on TikTok to some extent. Like, yeah,
no doubt, my sympathies as well. A trait I see time and time again when meeting optimistic people is curiosity. An interest in the world and awareness that there's so much we don't know gives us a reason to stay engaged with the world and oftentimes to learn more about ways people are working to make life better. Beatrice Erkers' curiosity led her down a PhD path originally, but that work wasn't action-oriented enough for her. She wanted to make an impact, and through the website 80,000 Hours, she found the Foresight Institute. By the way, I hadn't heard about 80,000 Hours, but have since checked it out, and it looks like an amazing resource if any of you might be interested. And I particularly liked what Beatrice said here about meaning, that the way to create meaning is to create something meaningful. She also praised one of my favorite thinkers and writers, the late Hans Rosling. If you haven't read the book Factfulness, I highly recommend it. Now back to our conversation and a discussion about the Existential Hope Podcast. You are now the director within the Foresight Institute. You're the director of the Existential Hope Program. You co-host the Existential Hope Podcast. How did the Existential Hope Program come about? Did you create it? How long has that been around? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think so. The credit for creating it should go to my colleague, Alison Dittman. She's the current CEO of Foresight Institute. She created it, I think maybe I would guess like 2020, maybe 2019, something like that. And the concept came about from, there's this academic paper, like a philosophy paper from two philosophers called Toby Gordon and Owen Cotton Barrett. And they wrote this paper called Existential Risk and Existential Hope, because there's a lot of talk about existential risk, and they do research on that, and that's very, very important. But they were also in this paper presenting this idea that maybe we should also think about we should not only think about ways to decrease existential risk, but also things that would like increase existential hope. And Alison sort of was very inspired by that idea. She sort of took it and ran with it. And she started doing these events in the Bay Area, basically, where she would like get people to submit their favorite resources that would like inspire existential hope for them. And people just really liked it. Like they felt they engaged with the concept. And so she just created this like library of existential hope resources. And then in terms of the program's development, I would say that I only started working on it full-time this year. So I've had about a year now, and it's very much like still an experiment, but I feel like we're starting to find our feet a little bit. We're basically been doing about like the podcast, I think is my favorite thing. It's just like the flagship, I would say. And it's, as you know, it's a great way to just like have great conversations and get the word out there. And we're also just experimenting with other things. We're doing a lot of, we call it world building. So it's like thinking about what are the scenarios that we want out there. And I think a really important question for us is, because it's part of Foresight Institute. Foresight Institute works on developing technologies, developing science. We want to think about, well, what is the future that we're wanting to create with these technologies and this science? So we are very focused on like our futures with different technologies, basically.
Yes. Amazing. And I really liked what you said about just putting more existential hope ideas out there, facts, stories, interviewing people, because I feel like, and it's the work I'm trying to do in my much smaller way, is it's very easy. The bad news is going to find us. It works very hard to find us. Our lizard brain, reacts to it, all that. So it takes an effort to put this other stuff out there. And I'd asked you before, it was sort of a leading question, if you feel like you've become more hopeful doing this work. It happens because the more you look for this stuff, the more you realize it's there. And so it's pushing a rock up a hill a little bit, but I think it's really important that we keep exposing people to all the goodness, all the hope. Books like Factfulness by Mr. Rosling, which I have recommended so many times because it really helped turn my head around. So I think that's amazing what you're doing. You also said something I hadn't heard before, and I struggle sometimes with these definitions, and I play around with them myself to suit my own needs sometimes. I like to say that an optimist is someone who believes that tomorrow can be better than today and that they have a role to play in making it so. So I try to put a sort of an active, you, I think, do probably a better job where you talk about hope and you've just defined it. Hope is optimism with a plan. I love that. So could you elaborate on that and help us understand how you come to that?
I don't think I should take credit for the quote. I don't remember the name of the person who said the quote, though. I think her name was Jacqueline something. We should look that up.
But you've repeated it, which is very helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, it's a great quote, I think. Yeah, I mean, there's all these definitions of like hope, optimism. I hear a lot of terms, and I think I don't really want to like say that one is better than the other. But yeah, I the way that I've been thinking about hope and like, you know, internalizing the existential hope concept has been to, I mean, the way that the concept that we took it was as in contrast to existential risk, like I mentioned. And so thinking about how can we bring more of what we want into the world, not just less of what we don't want, basically. And so I think that's how I've been thinking about it. And also, I've also been really shaped. There's this one article it's actually called Hope is Not Optimism, I think, by a psychologist called David Feldman, I think. And he writes about, for example, how he calls himself a hope psychologist, and he's done research on, for example, how having more or less hope can, for example, affect how you recover from cancer treatment and things like this. Because the way that he defines it was that the ones that have hope, it's not, I think it's very easy to dismiss someone who's like saying, oh, it's very important to have hope, or it's very important to be an optimist, and like say that, sure, like that's just dreaming and it's not doing anything. But the way that he defined it was that it's not about like thinking that everything is going to work itself out magically, but it's more about understanding, being aware that there are going to be obstacles, but I think that this better outcome is possible. And so being aware of the obstacles that I will have to face and overcome, I can reach that better outcome. And so I think that's how I think about it. It's not like if you're going through a cancer treatment that you think like, oh, I'm just going to wake up tomorrow and my cancer is going to be gone. It's more that you know that I can show up to every chemo treatment. It's going to be really hard, but I can do it. And you believe that you have that strength. And so I think that that's something that on a civilizational level, we've sort of, I feel like we need a bit more of it. And yeah, I mean, also obviously on an individual level, but that I feel like in the Existential Hope Program, we think oftentimes a bit more on the civilizational level. And I feel like it's very needed there, especially like in terms of the Western society and what we were talking about in terms of young people. I feel this very much.
And I also, in doing this research, learned a term, and I know you didn't come up with this because it was Tolkien, I think, Eucatastrophe. EU, then the word catastrophe. Could you describe, it's a fascinating concept I'd never heard of. It's just a great word too. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Like you said, it was Tolkien who came up with it. It's basically the opposite of a catastrophe. So if a catastrophe is an event where it happens and there's like, we're worse off, basically. The way that the philosophers would put it is that there's less value in the world. Whereas if you think of a eucatastrophe, it's an event that it happens and there's more value in the world. And this was a term that they used in that paper that we talked about, the Existential Risk and Existential Hope paper. And I think that the way that they used it was like very high level technical, like, for example, the example of a eucatastrophe that they mentioned was like the creation of life itself. And that's like, that's a very high bar for a eucatastrophe.
Yes.
And the way that we've been thinking about it and using it more is like, I think certain technologies could be seen as like a eucatastrophe, or like the invention of penicillin, like these sort of things where, all of a sudden we have like a much better toolkit to face the challenges.
I'm glad you mentioned penicillin too, and in our country and perhaps where you are as well, you know, vaccines have become very controversial and that sort of thing. And I think I think we forget the importance of these things at our peril, and just how much the world changed. Penicillin is one of the best examples. Woodrow Wilson was president of the United States. His son was 16 years old. You may know this. While he was a sitting president of the United States, his son developed a blister playing tennis. It got infected and he died. It was about 3 years before penicillin was invented. When we get a blister on our foot playing tennis, we don't think, oh my gosh, I'm going to die, right? These little things. And I often talk about the COVID vaccines. They became politicized, but the fact that we got out of this pandemic as much as we have, as quickly as we did, is an absolute miracle in my view. I remember when it first hit and I was researching, how long does it take to make a vaccine? And it was like, 20 years, 15 years. We'd still be locked down, but for these incredible. And so to the points you were making before about envisioning a better future, it really helps to appreciate the stuff we're doing right under our noses. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Very much.
I love this idea of pairing the study of existential risk with a look at existential hope. We'd all do ourselves a favor if, whenever we're presented with something that feels risky or inspires a feeling of doom, to look at the other side of that coin for a more hopeful outcome or solution. I also like hope is optimism with a plan. And from my research, it looks like the phrase was coined by Dr. Ron Brazil, PhD and psychologist. And as a lover of words, I have to spend a second here on Eucatastrophe. That's a fantastic word. It would also make a great name for a heavy metal band. And Eucatastrophe is a terrific way to think about seismically positive events like the creation of penicillin. Now, back to my blue sky conversation with Beatrice Erkers.
One of my favorite people that I had on the podcast was this sci-fi author, Ada Palmer. And she's a historian. She's a historian at Chicago University and a sci-fi author. So it's like this really interesting perspective of very familiar with the past. She specializes in the Renaissance. And I know that one of the things that she mentioned specifically was people used to think that these things were absolutely impossible, treating various health conditions. That was seen as absolutely not a possibility that we would ever be able to treat so many of these people that we're able to treat today. And I think we had a conference called Vision Weekend last week with Foresight Institute, and there was this speaker, Laura Deming, who she's a longevity researcher. She was showing this stat also of your point on whether you're born a few years apart, the level of advances that we've been able to make in certain cancer treatments, it will be defining on whether you're able to live or not.
Incredible.
And it can.
Oh, we're on the cusp of unbelievable advancements.
Yeah.
Remarkable. So Foresight Institute, a lot of your emphasis is on technology, past, present, and future. Are there particular technologies that get you all particularly excited about our future, whether they're in our hands now or coming, and of course, we can't not talk about artificial intelligence because that's all anyone's talking about. Where are you all coming out on some of the emerging technologies that we should be either more aware of, more excited about, or both?
Yeah. Well, I think I'll start with a few of the specifics. I think longevity is one that we have been excited about for a while, and I think that it's been an interesting field so Foresight has existed since the 80s, and I would say has been interested in longevity since the 80s, certainly since the 90s. There has been programming on it, and it's interesting now because it's become a lot more mainstream and a lot more like a booming industry, and so that's really exciting to follow. And I think the other field that feels like it's going to be the next booming field, other than I will get to AI as well, but would be neurotech. I think is, it sort of relates to what we've been talking about also on how young people are doing, and it is also very widespread that people are not maybe having great tools to deal with like mental health issues these days. And I think that could just be a revolution in terms of mental health treatments that we're able to offer. I was at this conference a few months ago where they had a patient advocate who had like these things operated into his brain. He had been depressed for over 10 years and had been very, very much at the cusp of taking his own life for many, many years, and was able to get this like trial treatment, and is now just doing so much better. He has a family, and it's just really inspiring when you see these things and when you think that this could become more accessible. And I think that they're also like, that's obviously a very invasive way to do it, like operating in things into your brain. But there's so much research also going on into how you can do these things non-invasively by just like light stimulation on certain areas of your brain with laser and stuff like that. So I think that's another field that I'm really excited about. And then obviously with AI, I think for us, AI is very interesting because it's there's obviously a lot that can be done and said with AI alone, but for us, it's very interesting to think about how it affects all the other fields also. Because, for example, the theme of the Vision Weekend that we hosted now was called AI for X. So X being like neurotech or biotech or existential hope even. So I think that's what is really interesting is like advances in science and technology thanks to AI. And I think there we have already seen some really interesting progress in terms of the winners of the Nobel Prize last year that were able to do so like this protein folding. There's also some like DNA prediction tools. And I think that's just like the next thing to keep an eye on that I think could be really exciting. Obviously also a very impactful technology that you have to think about how you integrate into society and all of these things. And that's what I would say that the Existential Hope Program to a really large extent also is focusing on right now, like thinking about what, like if we think of the best case scenarios that we want with AI, we want AI to be able to help us solve all these challenges. What's the best way to integrate it into society? And so, it's exciting, and we need to think about how we do it.
It's a really healthy way to look at it because I think, and it's all very understandable, but when people, a lot of consumers in this country at least will think of AI and they think of fake memes and I don't know what to believe anymore, and that's not real, and that is a form of AI. But the sort of underpinnings of these other technologies that could change radically for the better based on AI are fascinating. I had a guest on my show recently who's a venture capitalist, and he's investing in what he's describing as peace tech. So as opposed to military tech, peace tech. And I thought, well, what even is that? And a lot of it is AI modeling to do sort of war game scenarios. So you could anticipate when things might be heating up and then also anticipate the best ways to negotiate out of it, to basically to avoid war. And the more I talk to him and the more he describes some of these things they're investing in, I'm like, that's unbelievable. So that's not just AI on its own. It's taking the tools that AI has given you and saying, hey, maybe this could help us with world peace. It's amazing. And likewise, Sal Khan of Khan Academy, who'd be a great guest for you if you haven't had him on, has written a book called Brave New Words, and it's about AI in education. And here the knee-jerk is usually, well, AI lets you cheat on papers. Well, yes, it does, but it could also do X, Y, and Z. And he talks about being able to have a conversation with literary characters. You might appreciate that, talking to Jay Gatsby and asking him questions, or Thomas Jefferson, and these sorts of things, helping teachers with their lesson planning. All of a sudden, you get to the end of this book, and it's like, oh my God, AI could be the greatest thing that ever happened to education. But you start reading the book by thinking, well, it's just going to help kids cheat. The Foresight Institute does a lot of terrific work. Their Vision Week sounds like a great event, as bringing hopeful people together to talk about continuing to advance human progress will always be a positive and productive practice. Beatrice also mentioned Neurotech, which I'd read a little about just before she and I spoke. It can sound a little like something out of sci-fi and maybe even a little scary, but it does sound like there's some pretty amazing promise in this set of technologies. And I also believe it's helpful to think of ways in which AI will enable advancement in non-AI fields. Medicine, for example, is already benefiting from AI in remarkable ways, and likewise, as we discussed, other important fields are as well, like education. Getting back to our conversation, I wanted Beatrice to talk a bit about climate change. When I talk to people about what makes them pessimistic, the big ones I get are sort of media, social media, polarization in our politics, and climate change. And climate change feels like one that is so challenging because it's a global thing. We feel like maybe we can do our own small part, but we're not able to do a whole lot about it. It sort of waxes and wanes based on politics. How do you all think about climate change, or how have any of your guests you've talked to or people, if someone's listening to this and they are having that eco-anxiety, what would you say to them?
A few things. I would say that I guess this is the first thing I would do is I would recommend this book by Hannah Ritchie called Not the End of the World.
She's great.
She's a research scientist at Our World in Data. So literally all day she just sits and looks at data. And she sort of in this book goes through her personal journey of being extremely worried about climate to like actually then looking at the data, like our idol Hans Rosling did as well, like actually looking at the data. And we're actually, it's not as bad as you've been taught maybe for a long time. And that there are tools that we have at our hands to problem solve these things. And I think that that's like the main thing that I want people to carry with them a bit more is that we're actually, like, human beings are really good at problem solving. And we have tools, we have technologies at our hand, we can create more of them, we can invest more in them. And there are things that we can do about climate change, because I think that's where the desperateness or like where the hopelessness comes from, is you feel like there's nothing you can do, or you feel like it's like what you can do is like so individualized that it just feels pointless. Like, yeah, you can recycle, but maybe I don't think that's gonna like save us, to be honest. So I think you should look at these like more high leverage interventions of like, can we do something to get cleaner energy? And actually, if you look at different technological solutions, there are things we can do. So I would point people again, like actually to this 80,000 hours resource, because they have done research on like what are high leverage things to do. And so I think that's a really great one. I also think that I'm quite inspired by, have you heard of like the progress movement or like there's this, one of the founders, basically Jason Crawford, I just talked to him, and he's written this techno-humanist manifesto, and he talks a lot about how humans are like the problem-solving animal. There are so many things that we have been sort of faced with through history where we have been able to invent our way out of them. And I think that this is something that we should keep in mind with climate again. And again, so I'm not saying like, oh, we should just ignore it, it's going to solve itself. What we should do is we should like look at the data, think about what should we do here, and try to do something about it, basically. And I think that we have so many actually tools at our hand, because there has been so much invested in the like climate question for so long at this point, where I think we're actually in a quite a good position in many ways to improve our situation.
We mentioned what Jason Crawford was saying about and human ingenuity. Kevin Kelly is another person who I admire, who writes a lot about hope and optimism, and he says it's helpful sometimes to understand that yesterday's solutions have caused a lot of today's problems, and that's what happens. So, for example, fossil fuel burning helped create, the Industrial Revolution, pulled people out of poverty, helped raise standards of living, lower cost of living, all these things. And it led to, in large part, climate change. And so now our job is to come up with a solution to yesterday's problem, knowing that we may be creating problems in the future. That's just sort of how it goes with humans. And I think you said something really important, which is we have the tools when it comes to climate change. And it's like healthcare. We have all these tools, and the image you paint of a better future, most of these tools are at our disposal. We just have to keep hope and stay after it and put them in place. And I'm glad you mentioned Our World in Data. People who follow me online, I'm reposting their stuff all the time. I'm huge fans of their work. And back to Mr. Rosling, they help you see in statistics just how the remarkable progress that we've made, and that, in my view, can only really be jeopardized if people give up. I liked hearing Beatrice point out that humans are a problem-solving species. Yes, we're great at causing them, but it's also in our nature to fix them. She also gave us another great resource here, Hannah Ritchie, of whom I'm a big fan. And I recommend checking out her work at Our World in Data, as well as her books, including Not the End of the World, How We Can Be the First Generation to Build a Sustainable Planet. By the way, she's a member of and speaking to Beatrice's generation, not mine. Now back to the final segment of my Blue Sky conversation with Beatrice Erkers. You talk about the future, and one thing you all have done is I've seen you describe world building for 2045, and it's funny because as someone who, when I was a kid, the year 2000 was like this way out there future thing. We're going to be in flying cars and everything. And when I first read 2045, I'm like, that's so far away. That's 20 years away, less than. So, or about to be less than. Tell me about world building for 2045. Why put a date to it? How'd you come up with that one? And sort of what is that whole project about?
Yeah, I mean, we've done for both 2045. I think that was like 2 years ago. And then we did for 2035 this year. So I think originally the 2045 one was because we were thinking of like our AI timelines, basically, like we were thinking of when we would have like really advanced AI, and we were thinking then by 2045 would be a more realistic date. But then there's been so much progress that we actually like shortened that timeline a bit, and we wanted to see like actually in 10 years, what could it look like? So yeah, I mean, the reason that we've been doing that is basically because we think that AI can be really transformative for society. And so we should think about what kind of society we want to build with it. And we think that world building is a really good tool for that, because it's not just like scenario building where you would build out like, how would this specific thing in the future look like? How would our economic institutions look like in 2035? But it's really rather like, how would our society look like across different institutions and across like the things that matter to us, like our everyday life, our like social relationships, things like that. Because it's obviously you can't cover everything. There's so much, but it's at least a little bit more exhaustive, and it's at least a little bit more that you can think about how things are interconnected as well. So it's if we think about, we have painted a picture of what the economic institutions look like in 2045. What happens if we change something? How does that affect our social relations, for example? Or, because things are really interconnected. And then what's interesting about that, obviously, is not just like, okay, what could a society look like? But what could a desirable society look like? And how do we backcast from there to where we are today and think about, well, what do we need to do now to start getting towards that? Because otherwise you end up in this circle that I think we are in a bit more now, which is very natural, but where you're just like thinking about, again, what you want to avoid. So you're just like, oh, we need to avoid this. We need to avoid this. And so you're not maybe ending up at like the the destination that you want to get at. Whereas if you think a bit more about maybe roughly this is the destination that we want to get to, you could be a bit more successful in steering towards it. Obviously, with many, many caveats here that the world is very complicated, and I'm not saying you can let's achieve B and we're gonna just achieve B very easily. It's a straight path. It's more like, I think we're a bit more likely to achieve at this destination that we want to if we have at least a bit of an idea that it's what we want to steer towards.
I love it. And I think it's always helpful to have any goal be time bound. So a lot of people say, well, in the future, we'll be able to blah, blah, blah. How about, well, in the next 10 years, the next 5 years, by the end of this year, I think it's super helpful. So what's the future look like for the Foresight Institute, for the Existential Hope work and the podcast? What are you all hoping to do to grow, advance? What are your visions for the future of your organization?
Yeah, for the Foresight Institute, it's our 40th anniversary next year. We were founded in 1986, so next year we're going to celebrate. And we're going to have like a bunch of events. We always have this event called Vision Weekend every year in December in the Bay, and this year we're having 3 of them to celebrate that it's our 40th anniversary. So we're going to have one in Puerto Rico, one here in London, and one in San Francisco. And so that's going to be our biggest celebration. We're also launching these physical hubs or nodes, as we call them, one in San Francisco and one in Berlin, where people working on AI for science, AI for safety, security, like these sort of things, can come and physically work at these locations and connect with other people who are working on the same things. So we're actually, like, Foresight has existed for 40 years now, but we've never had like an actual physical space. So we're really excited to have that. Bring it into the real world. And then with the Existential Hope Program, I think next year we're excited to just find our feet a bit more. So that would be, we're going to continue on the podcast. We're actually starting to try to do more of these conversations in person, because I did a few now, and it's so nice to meet people in person.
I know. I've been a guest in person. I haven't been able to host in person. But
it is also a lot of logistics, but that's one of the things that I'm excited for. We just hosted this basically meme competition where we asked people to think of, like, basically create short form media. Memes could also be short videos, could also be a tweet or something like that, that helps convey like an existential hope theme. And so we just did that, and we're excited to announce it next week, like the winner and everything. And we're going to do that again next year, because it was just so much fun and so much interesting content that we got this year. We're also going to start producing a bit more media. We're working with a TED producer to actually like try to produce short form media on positive AI futures, and really like get more of the more like short form content out there that people will, because the podcast is great for like these long form conversations, but we also want to like package our ideas and like get them out in a bit more short form format, because that's the way to get them out these days. So yeah, there's a lot basically.
Well, more power to you on all that. And I think the 40-year window is an interesting one, because, and I would encourage, I'm sure you guys are thinking about this, but if you looked at the progress that the world has made in those 40 years, 1986, the Berlin Wall was still standing. 1986, AIDS was rampaging. In 1986, we were worried about the ozone layer. I mean, you could go through, it's staggering just in the life of your organization, what's happened. As we look forward, as you all have, to 2035, 2045, who knows, right? And probably that pace of acceleration is only going to increase. So I can't thank you enough for the work you're doing, for taking the time to speak with me. It's really encouraging, especially for an old guy like me, to see younger people coming in and following the footsteps of the late, great old Mr. Rosling, who's just a huge fan of. But thank you so much for your time and all the energy you're putting into this important work.
Thank you. And likewise, thank you so much for your work. And yeah, it was lovely to come on.
Take care. I love the idea of thinking about the type of world we should envision and work towards for the year 2045. And again, it's really inspiring to think about just how much progress we can make between now and then. We'll only get there, I believe, and I know Beatrice will agree, if we stay hopeful and optimistic. After all, as Beatrice says, what's the point in being pessimistic? I hope you enjoyed this Blue Sky conversation with Beatrice Erkers. Before you go, it would help us out a lot if you'd leave us a rating and/or review. And consider subscribing to the Blue Sky podcast and following the Optimism Institute on social media to be sure you never miss a future episode. This and all Blue Sky episodes are made possible by the incredible editing and mixing done by the remarkable team at Sound On, Sound Off. You can learn more about their work at soundonsoundoff.com. And all graphic design and cover art for Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute are provided by Crush Graphics. That's Crush with a K if you'd like to check out more of their fantastic work at crushgraphics.com. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.